On today's episode of Locked on Wild, what can the Minnesota Wild learn from Vegas's 2022-2023 Stanley Cup title run?
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked on Wild. We are your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, and we are your team every day. We thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we will take a look at the Vegas Golden Knights' run to the 2022-2023 Stanley Cup trophy. We'll take a look at how the Golden Knights were able to overcome yet another Mark Stone injury and how they really rode a hot start and a hot finish to flipping the switch and getting it done in the postseason when it mattered most. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and continuing our series here, looking back at previous Stanley Cup champions to try to pull on some themes to see if there's anything that the Minnesota Wilds can learn from the last few Stanley Cup champions. And when we started this series with the Florida Panthers on Tuesday, we discussed the top six depth up the middle, and how the Florida Panthers were able to really ride that to the Stanley Cup trophy this past season. Vegas is a little bit of a different story, although, as we will note, the Golden Knights were pretty strong up the middle themselves. But you look at Vegas's overall numbers for the 2022-2023 season, they were tied with Toronto in points with 111. They were 51, 22, and 9. Now, if we go in those four categories, goals for, goals against, power play, penalty kill, Vegas was not in the top 10 in any of those categories. In fact, they were near the middle of the league in pretty much all of them. If we go with goals for, Vegas clocked in at 14th overall in the league with 267 goals for. So 14th in goals for. If we go with goals against, Vegas was 11th with 225. Power play percentage. Vegas clocked in at 18th overall with a 20.3 power play percentage. On the penalty kill, the Golden Knights were 19th in the league with a 77.4% penalty kill on the season. And so we talked about that with Florida on Tuesday, is that the Panthers were pretty consistent in all of those areas. Vegas didn't really get a lot of style points for the wins that they put together in the 2022-2023 season. Now, if you look at how the season played out for the Golden Knights, they got off to just a blistering start, 13-2 through November 10th. And so that's a great way to get a season going, is to just come out the gates swinging. And you look at one of the players among many who played a pivotal role for the Golden Knights on the season, Mark Stone, who has battled injuries over the last several seasons for Vegas. He comes into play here a little bit later. But I want to look at just what the Golden Knights had going for them in that Cup season. You look at the number of players that played 80-plus games. It's not a long list. You had 5 players that played 80-plus games, that's a good amount to have. And it was William Karlsson, Phil Kessel, Braden McNabb, Chandler Stevenson, and Nicholas Haug. Now, 70-plus games, add Riley Smith, Alec Martinez, Jonathan Marchessault, Keegan Colasar, and Alex Pietrangelo to that list. Now, the two arguably biggest performers for the Vegas Golden Knights, Jack Eichel played in 67 games, and Mark Stone played in 43. Now, this is in the regular season. Those are two of the, other than Jonathan Marchessault, those are probably the two biggest keys to Vegas for their success offensively. But, those guys do plenty defensively as well. So Vegas was able to put up the kind of year that they did, despite missing Jack Eichel for 25 games and Mark Stone for almost half the season. Other things that Vegas was able to do really effectively was they were able to go out on the road and come away with wins, 26, 7, and 8 on the season. So if the Golden Knights were going on the road to take somebody on, especially in a tough environment, they were able to go in and neutralize what that opponent brought to the table and pick up road wins in bunches throughout the season. The goalie situation for the Vegas Golden Knights was an interesting roller coaster as well, but let's talk Mark Stone for a little bit. Mark Stone was injured in the January 12th game against the Florida Panthers. He played just 4 minutes in that game, and he was done for the rest of the season. If you look at where Vegas was at on January 12th, they were 28, 13, and 2. So 13 games above 500 at that point. You look at what happened next, and the Golden Knights lost 7 of their next 8 games. The only win in that stretch was against Washington by a score of 6-2. And so at that point, you're 29, 18, and 4, and you're wondering, are we going to be able to get things figured out and get this thing back on track? Then came the All-Star break. And from the All-Star break, from the first game back, February 7th, Vegas won 5 straight, including beating the Minnesota Wild 5-1. And from February 7th to the end of the season, the Golden Knights lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 games. They went from 29, 18, and 4 to 51, 22, and 9. And so that's another thing that I kind of want to key in on for this Vegas Golden Knights team is that they were missing some key pieces, some critical pieces of their puzzle, but they rallied and were able to get through the regular season playing some of their best hockey of the year. From March 9th through March 25th, Vegas lost 1 game, and that was to the Calgary Flames. They really started, that was an 8 of 9 stretch. They went 8-1 in that 9-game stretch. They really started to pick it up because one of the things that we knew about Bruce Cassidy coming in as head coach was that he has a very structured system that he brings to the table. And so the Golden Knights were not going to, they're not going to win games flashy for the most part. There are a lot of 1-goal games throughout the majority of the season. I know they got out to the second half start like gangbusters, 5-1 wins back-to-back, then a 7-2 win. But there were plenty of 3-2, 4-3, 5-3, 4-3. There were plenty of let's just get it done type wins that the Vegas Golden Knights were able to stack together when they felt like they needed to rally and get their season back on track. So that's one of the keys that I wanted to kind of key in on here for this Vegas team is playing their best hockey when it matters most. From, say, March to the end of the season, Vegas was arguably one of the best teams in the league, and they kicked it up even a notch above that when the postseason got started. And so we'll look at some of the additions that they made because of what they did with Mark Stone. And we'll also take a look at how the goalie situation shaped up because it was a turnstile for Vegas for a lot of the season. We'll talk about that as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Game Time. We are right in the midst of the Major League Baseball season. Summer is already flipping to August. It's crazy to say that we're gearing up on college football and the NFL getting back into our lives, which means that you are running out of time to take advantage of great ticket offers to see your favorite Major League Baseball teams in action. Sit out in the stands. If you're a Twins fan, you can go check out that pontoon seating in right field out at Target Field. Game Time can make getting MLB tickets a breeze. They offer a ton of great last-minute deals. And did you know that Game Time's tickets actually go down in price the closer you get to your event? You can also take a look at their zone deals where you pick a section and Game Time will let you choose the seats. All-in pricing, which shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You have to turn this feature on, but it shows you what you're going to pay without anything sneaking up on you at checkout. All of those are just a fraction of what Game Time has to offer. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team every day. A couple of reminders for you. Make sure to send us a snapshot of your subscription to Locked On Wild on YouTube. Email lockedonwild@gmail.com with your name so that we can add you into the Locked On Wild sweepstakes. We're giving away 2 tickets to see the Minnesota Wild take on the Columbus Blue Jackets on October 10th at the Eichel Energy Center. That is the home opener. Dean Evison will be on the other side of the bench, so it should be a lot of fun. So make sure to get entered in to the Locked On Wild sweepstakes. Again, just screenshot your subscription and email to lockedonwild@gmail.com. Full contest rules can be found in the description of this episode. Also coming up on August 25th, Sunday, from 12 to 3, we've got a live show and meet and greet at Zamboni's on 7th. That's going to be an outrageously good time. We've got guests lined up, Alexis Pearson, State of Hoppy from the Soda Pod. We've also got Pat and Alex Micheletti who will be on the show. And the one that you're all going to be there to see, Denny will be there too. So should be a good time. 12 to 3 at Zamboni's on 7th, just across from the Eichel Energy Center. Come hang out. We'll have bags going on out back, plus the live show. We'll be interacting with listeners all afternoon. So stop on out. Mark it on your calendars. Should be a great opportunity. And don't worry if you aren't able to show up. We will be broadcasting live as well. So we'll connect everybody watching at home with everybody hanging out at Zamboni's on 7th. Should be a lot of fun. August 25th, 12 to 3. Be there. And we'll say hi. Let's get back to the conversation about the Vegas Golden Knights. How did they win the Stanley Cup in 2022-2023? We talked about them righting the ship after Mark Stone's injury. Obviously, the flip side of that is that due to the current cap, whatever you want to call it, regulations, Mark Stone was put on long-term injured reserve to get through the regular season. Vegas added players to that mix during that time, including the likes of Ivan Barbashev. They traded for him. before the trade deadline. They also acquired Jonathan Quick to just help out with the goalie room because, they had traded for Adin Hill, but he wasn't a huge factor in everything that was going on as of yet. They just were decimated by goalie injuries as the season wore on. So Vegas just added options to the mix to be able to keep themselves in contention for a Stanley Cup playoff spot. Then you get to the end of the regular season. There is no salary cap in the postseason, and so Vegas simply has to activate Mark Stone. He goes on the roster. We've done this song and dance before. He goes on the roster, and he absolutely lights it up in the postseason. And so does Jack Eichel, your two top dogs for the Vegas Golden Knights. They had fantastic postseasons in leading the way. Eichel had 26 points in the 22 postseason games, but Jonathan Marchessault right there. He had 13 goals and 25 points in 22 games. Mark Stone had 11 goals and 13 assists, 24 total points in 22 games. And then Chandler Stevenson, who had a great season in the faceoff dot for the Vegas Golden Knights, he stepped up with 10 goals in 22 postseason games and 20 total points. And Ivan Barbashev, who was acquired at the trade deadline, he stepped up too with 18 total points in 22 games. William Karlsson had 11 goals and 17 points in the 22 games. How's that for spreading the wealth and having some guys step up beyond the usual suspects to help Vegas get the Stanley Cup? And then you look at the postseason picture as well. Adin Hill stepped in after getting some starts in the regular season. He he started 25 games, was 16-7-1. And so when he came in, he helped kind of solidify the goalie situation and was in a tandem with Logan Thompson at the beginning of the year, then got hurt. Vegas tried to just get through the rest of the regular season. He came back, was great in the postseason. And, the big theme here is just about guys stepping up when the situation calls for it. When somebody needs a goal, when your team needs a goal, somebody's just got to go get it. When your team needs a save, somebody's just got to go get it. It just matters so much more in the postseason. It's either you get it or you don't. And oftentimes those key plays lead to you winning or losing. It's not like the regular season where you say, well, we'll be better in that particular area next time. A lot of times there isn't a next time when you get to the postseason. Now, playoff-wise, in the 2022-2023 season, let's check the numbers again for the Vegas Golden Knights and see how they fared. Now, obviously, they won the Cup. They were number one in the postseason in goals with 88. Next closest was the Florida Panthers with 62. Goals against. Vegas was... Now, you got to keep in mind here, too, that a lot of these teams played just one round. And so we'll go with the teams that played 10 or more postseason games, which was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different teams. Vegas was near the bottom of the list. They had 57 goals allowed in the 22 games. But again, you played 22 games. That's 2.59 goals per game. And so let's take a look there. They were fourth in the entire postseason in goals against per game. Power play, Vegas was at 21.9%. So they improved from the regular season to the postseason. Penalty kill, not great. 71.7% in the postseason. That seemed like that was the only weak link for the Vegas Golden Knights throughout the entirety of their postseason run. But folks, it's a pretty simple formula for the Vegas Golden Knights here. The big key players stepped up when it mattered most. They were able to navigate some key injuries, and other players stepped in to help. And so let's dissect the lessons that the Minnesota Wild can learn from this Cup run as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you will always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team every day. We got another episode coming up for you later today. We'll continue to take a look back to try to find some lessons that can be learned by the Minnesota Wild over the last few Stanley Cup championships. So a few things to keep in mind. Let's start with the cap maneuverability. So Mark Stone goes on long-term injured reserve. Now, obviously, Mark Stone makes enough money that if you have that much money available for you, you're going to do something with it. Vegas also had the Robin Lehner long-term injured reserve cap hits to use at their disposal as well. So that's one of the things that has been most interesting, I think, about the last couple of seasons for the Minnesota Wild is Vegas has these opportunities. You put a guy on long-term injured reserve and they use the cap relief to help them during that season while full knowing that they're going to have to make some decisions in the offseason. And they still do it. Like Vegas has made more than a few moves over the last few years in which they just straight up like give players away for cap relief. There was the very notable one, and I know he plays now in Washington, but Max Pacioretty, or he did play in Washington, I should say. Max Pacioretty was a member of the Vegas Golden Knights. He was traded to Carolina for future considerations. $7 million cap hit, and he was just straight up traded to try to give Vegas a little bit of relief from their cap situation. Because the Vegas Golden Knights, amongst few, I should say, view an NHL team as a business. They're not afraid to move on from players without notice and quickly. Look at the situation that went down with Marc-Andre Fleury during his time with Vegas. Ended up being sent to Chicago. They did that because they viewed it as in the best interest of the team to make that decision. And I think we've seen a little bit of the other side of the coin here. Now, Jared Spurgeon was put on long-term injured reserve last season. And the money that was freed up was used basically to allow for call-ups. Now, you could argue that under the current situation that the Minnesota Wild find themselves in, that was probably smart business to not go crazy just because you have a little bit of money open up to spend it all, as opposed to just saying, this isn't money that's mine. So you could argue that the Wild made a smart choice to not sink assets into that. But that's why the Vegas Golden Knights are routinely a playoff contender, is because they do whatever it takes to make it happen. And if you're in, as in going for it, you can't let one single injury deter you from that. You have to have the mindset of, we're going to do whatever it takes. We are going to deal with the consequences, whatever they may be, after the fact. And, you know, that's just the price. That's just the price of doing business as an NHL franchise. You know, one notable move that I left off the list for Vegas, they went out and they got Tomas Hertl. They just, no stone unturned. And they'll just deal with the consequences down the line, because their contention window is open right now. It's maybe now starting to kind of close up a little bit. But if your contention window is open and you're serious about going for it, you gotta go for it, because there just is no shortage of things. You can run into a goalie on the other team that just goes on a huge run. There are a lot of different things that can happen. And so the lesson I think to learn for the Minnesota Wild here is more on the business side of the ice. We know right now it's tough for the Wild to legitimately compete because of what they're dealing with on their books. But once that's gone, you have to develop an action plan pretty quickly. Get things moving, get things mobilized, and you deal with the consequences later on. Because guess what? If you're a general manager and you don't win, you're not going to be dealing with those consequences anyway. So the things that stand out for Vegas on this run to the Stanley Cup championship, the big guys stepped up brightest when it mattered in the postseason. But you also got key contributions from other players that would be considered more secondary or depth scoring. Adin Hill stepped into the goalie situation and really helped solidify it down the stretch. And Vegas didn't just win these games in the postseason. Like, you look at some of the scores, especially in even the Stanley Cup final against Florida, 5-2, 7-2, 9-3. They weren't just beating the Florida Panthers. They were making a statement. And so this Vegas Golden Knights team, they did what they needed to do in the regular season. But then once the postseason started, all right, time to go. No questions asked. We're going to do whatever is necessary to come away with the win. So an interesting comparison here, because, you know, you look at those regular season numbers and nothing really stood out. But the playoffs, the Stanley Cup playoffs, that's the big prize. That's the key in all of this, is that, you know, you need to be going into the postseason playing your best hockey, so that you can go in with some momentum and come away with the wins when it counts. So that's our look at the Vegas Golden Knights Stanley Cup Championship and what the Minnesota Wild can take from that 2022-2023 season. We've got another episode coming for you later today, and if we continue down this road, I believe Colorado Avalanche are the next in line. So we'll be taking a look at how they were able to win the Stanley Cup championship, Stanley Cup trophy a couple of seasons ago. So make sure to tune in for that coming up later here this afternoon. Reminder, make sure to screenshot your subscription to Locked On Wild on YouTube with your name to lockedonwild@gmail.com so we can get you entered into the Locked On Wild sweepstakes. And we'll see you on August 25th for the live show and meet and greet at Zamboni's on 7th. Make sure to subscribe if you have not already so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got new episodes for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.